So Jeff, Sandra, and Rachel, please introduce yourselves first in like 30 seconds and tell us what your expertise is in immigration and entrepreneurship.
Thanks, Bill. My name is Jeff Goldman. I'm an immigration lawyer with a private practice in Kendall Square and also in Salem, north of Boston, and we have offices in the Silicon Valley as well. My whole career, 27 years, has been working with startup companies who have immigration problems and need creative solutions. I've been blessed to also represent Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies for all of their H-1Bs, Ls, Es, Os. We have a staff of 16 people, and we're helping companies grow. So we're in the business of helping companies grow. A couple of other things. I'm one of the co-founders of the Global Entrepreneur in Residence program, which you'll hear a little bit more about tonight. And currently, I serve as the immigration advisor to Governor Charlie Baker.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Torres. I'm immigration counsel for the University of Massachusetts. So I work in an in-house capacity. I've been with the university for about 4 years, and before that I was in-house counsel for a multinational IT company based in Waltham. I've learned a lot about the entrepreneurial program and GEIR through supporting Bill in the Boston campus and also our Lowell campus that has a GEIR program. So thanks everyone for coming.
Good afternoon, good evening. I am just so glad to see so many faces, some familiar faces, and want to thank Bill and Aijan and the whole staff. I'm Rachael Casius. I am the founder and managing attorney of Casseus Law, and we really specialize in helping postdocs and entrepreneurs go from an H1 or an F to a green card. And so we really do specialize in helping early entrepreneurs and early researchers take the next step to figure out what their immigration goals are. We have an office located at the Cambridge Innovation Center, so we're right in Kendall Square. Jeff is a wonderful neighbor. We also have a staff of 5 people currently. We're growing, which is very exciting. And really, we're just here to answer questions to help people get to a green card. We also do O1s, EB-1A, EB-1B, and national interest waivers. And to date, we have not lost a case.
Is there any one of us that has not 100% approval rating or approval rate? By the way, when we say we haven't lost a case, these folks fight so hard. Sometimes they have to resubmit, sometimes they have to take a different course, but they never, ever give up. I've had the pleasure of working with all 3 of them. They never, ever give up on a candidate. And sometimes they authorize an actual appeal to the supervisor of the immigration service examiner who made an error in their decision. So these are the heroes, actually, of the innovation economy in Boston. So I think everyone's here tonight to kind of figure out, given that there's an interest in entrepreneurship on their part, they might be a senior that's just graduated, or they might be in graduate school on occupational practical training, or they might be here at an accelerator on a B1 visa, or they might be visiting scientists in a lab on a J1 visa, but they're inspired by the innovation ecosystem here in Massachusetts, and for whatever other reason, they want to stay and create their own company. But then they read the headlines and they get concerned about, well, what's really happening with immigration in this country? And is there any certainty anymore? So I guess the question is, from the standpoint of the folks who are interested in staying here, growing a company and creating jobs and hiring students and otherwise contributing to our economy, what should they be thinking about? What should they be looking for? What does the landscape look like today, and how do we think it's going to change? And I guess I'll ask Sandra, because You know, we're at a university together, and we were affected directly by actions in the past 3, 4, 5 months, which stranded some of our faculty and students in other parts of the world. And it has not been a pleasure to work with, but she would probably be the best person to start off that conversation with regard to what does the visa situation look like for people who want to stay after they graduate and make a life and create a company.
Right, so I'm going to sort of quickly go through some of the latest updates that we have. There's certainly been a lot of action happening at the federal level regarding immigration. So I would say that the current landscape in terms of, for entrepreneurs and immigration, I would say I feel cautiously optimistic, and that's not a term I've been using lately when engaging with my campus partners, but in the entrepreneurial space, we've had a number of recent activities that I think have been really positive. So one is that on January 17th of this year, a final rule was passed that has a very long title, but a lot of us talk about it as the highly skilled worker rule. It had a lot of provisions in it, but some of the provisions that impacted entrepreneurs had to do with really codifying, clarifying, and sometimes broadening eligibility requirements for H-1B cap exemptions. So this has to do with our H-1B GEIRs that we have at the university, whether they're employed by us directly or whether they're employed by a third-party petitioner that's using the university for cap-exempt status. So before, we were really sort of using a lot of agency guidance to be able to file those petitions. Now we have a final rule to fall back on, and that becomes important when we come to the discussion of how quickly can things change. So that was one very positive thing. The second thing that has happened was that in December we had a decision by the Administrative Appeals Office, which is an immigration sort of court system, that loosened, I would say, opened up the legal framework for NIW cases. These are cases that allow individuals to self-sponsor for permanent residency status. And those sort of opened up standards, those relaxed standards are very beneficial to entrepreneurs. So now it's I would say more possible for entrepreneurs to actually qualify for NIW. And I love that my colleagues who actually file these cases are shaking their heads under this decision that happened in December. The third thing is the International Entrepreneurial Rule. I think many of you are probably aware. That was released in early January, and it will be final July 17th if nothing happens. There are provisions in this rule, once again, to allow individuals to remain, live, reside, and work in the United States, and also grant their spouses work authorization. So we're closely monitoring the deadline for that rule. And the last thing that I think that it's very positive is that within the broader scope of everything that's been happening with immigration, as many of you know, we've had a lot of federal court litigation. The University of Massachusetts has actually been involved in 2 federal court filings with the Attorney General's office on the initial and then the revised travel ban. There have been numerous, thank you, a lot of work went into those. And we were there to basically show impact to the state through harm to the university if both of those travel bans, executive order travel bans went through. A tremendous amount of work was done with additional filings, amicus brief filings, and I shared one of them with my colleagues last week. We had a prep call for this seminar. I was very impressed with the Massachusetts Technology Leadership Council and an amicus brief that they filed with the Hawaii court decision that is now we're waiting for a decision by the Ninth Circuit on that one, but it basically laid out not only why the ban was unconstitutional, but why it was against the public interest, because entrepreneurs, immigrants, contribute so much to our innovation economy here in the state of Massachusetts. So if any of you are open to reading amicus briefs, I point you to that one because it just has a lot of really interesting statistics and research behind it.
So Sandra, you're cautiously optimistic.
That's the good news. I think there's been a lot
You
of
can stop
heightened
there if you'd
awareness,
like.
a lot of heightened awareness about the contributions, like I said, to the innovation economy. All of this is couched within a broader framework that really has to do with a lot of aggressive action by the federal government on various types of immigration issues. So we recently had Department of State issue their notice on what their extreme vetting questions are going to be in the supplemental visa application form. The most recent executive order was the Buy American, Hire American executive order, which really has very broadly worded language regarding all employment-based visa benefits, but also targeting the H-1B program. And then Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and Department of Labor have been communicating within the last 4 to 6 weeks about how they are going to coordinate even better as federal agencies in scrutinizing the H-1B program and engaging in employment-based enforcement actions. So we as employers are bracing for this. That's sort of the larger context. Is that good?
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. Rachael,
Yes, Bill?
you work with a lot of engineers and scientists, some of whom work for high-growth companies, some of them start them. How are you feeling about the current state of affairs and where it's headed?
So I'd also share in Sandra's optimism. We are getting NIW approvals every day.
What is NIW, by the way? Is that a license plate number?
It could be. So NIWs are national interest waivers, and that is the employment-based second category under which you are able to obtain a green card. As Sandra did say, the NIWs are self-sponsored, so you don't need an employer or a job offer, and actually based on one's expertise in the field, they could potentially sponsor themselves for a green card. And so we really have had such a wonderful experience working with researchers, entrepreneurs. We just helped a GEIR get his green card. So really there are wonderful opportunities. And as Sandra said, on December 26th, was it, Jeff? We got a gift in the form of Donna Sarr. It was a new decision. It replaces the old national interest waiver standard, which was formerly New York State Department of Transportation. And no longer does an applicant have to show that their work is national in scope. And really that was a problem for a lot of researchers and entrepreneurs whose work only affected a certain locality. So now with that prong out, it's sort of open season.
Jeff, how do you see things now for entrepreneurs and developing in the next 6 to 12 months? And what should people be looking at?
I think there's a lot of opportunity out there within all the actions of the current administration. So I'm actually more than optimistic because you people in this audience are miles ahead of the game from other immigrants because you have a lot to offer our economy in the United States. And those are the people the Immigration Service will be looking to approve. So I'm very optimistic. I'm going to talk about a couple of other things. Do you want me to talk about those?
Please go for it. We're looking for really practical things that folks should pay attention to. And I know you've got a bunch of them.
Yeah, I want to start on, only because we've just been mentioning national interest waivers, I do want to bring out one important thing. You can follow all the rules and you can follow all the regulations and submit the evidence that the government says they're looking for. But to me, nothing serves you better than clear evidence that you stand out from the pack. Because to me, the Immigration Service keeps issuing requests for evidence, or I'm reading online about denials that all talk about the fact that, well, you're really good at this and you've done a lot, but you don't seem to stand out from the pack, and what you're doing is the norm for a postdoctoral candidate or the norm for a postdoc. So I think the key is right now, Start figuring out the way that you're going to stand out from your peers in some kind of leadership position, some kind of major role in your lab or in your work or in what you're doing. I want to jump over to the CAP-exempt H-1B issue and the global entrepreneur in residence issue, because the bottom line is most of you are wondering where you're heading if you don't win the H-1B lottery. I just want to give a very, very brief summary of what H-1B is. H-1B is a specialty occupation, meaning a U.S. employer must be offering a job to a foreign national that requires a specialized degree, and you, the foreign national, must have at least the equivalent of a bachelor's degree in that specialized field. You can get that equivalent through a combination of degrees or a combination of work experience and education, but you have to have at least the equivalent of a bachelor's degree in the specialized field. For startups, H-1B has several significant problems. Number one, they're limited in number. That's a problem for everyone, not just startups. I'm not going to get into the lottery and the whole thing about that because you all know about that. But they're limited in number and they're never available when you want one. The other problems for startups is the requirement for that there be an employer-employee relationship, a bona fide employer-employee relationship, because you cannot self-sponsor. You cannot own your own company and then sponsor yourself for H-1B. But the issue isn't ownership, it's an issue of control. So every day we're filing H-1Bs for entrepreneurs who own a majority of their company. But we prove that there is a bona fide employer-employee relationship by proving that the entrepreneur does not have the ultimate control over his or her employment. We prove that the entrepreneur can be fired, and we do this by making sure that the bylaws clearly state that this one entrepreneur cannot control the board of directors. Happy to talk to anyone about that later. The other problem for startups with H-1B, the prevailing wage. H-1B requires that the employer pay the prevailing wage according to the U.S. Department of Labor's wage survey. You can bring in other wage salary surveys, but the bottom line is you have to pay the fair wage, and that's hard for a startup. We regularly use a strategy. If the company absolutely can't afford to pay that wage and they'll never be able to prove it, we use strategies of filing for part-time H-1Bs because you're allowed to file for part-time H-1Bs. Let me just preface that. It must be part-time work. You certainly cannot, and we would not, file for a part-time H-1B if the person's working full-time. But that might be just what you need to get going, to enter the H-1B lottery, to win the lottery, and then worry about later how you're going to move from part-time to full-time. Or if you're doing a CAP-exempt H-1B, you might just need to start part-time so the company can prove that it can afford to pay the wage. Another problem for startups, USCIS is demanding clear evidence that the company has enough work that requires the specialty occupation. That's not always easy for startups to do, but we have strategies and we can advise you on that. CAP-exempt H-1Bs. These are H-1Bs that are available even if the cap has been met, because cap-exempt petitioners don't have to have the foreign national counted against the annual cap. There are 4 organizations, and I want to take the time to talk about this because everyone knows that a university is a cap-exempt organization, but it's not only universities. It's also government research organizations. And what's new, as of this past January when the new regulations came out, government research organizations now include local and state research organizations. This opens up a whole plethora of opportunities that weren't there before. You might be working on, you could probably find, probably I shouldn't say, but it might be possible to find a project with a local government, a town or city government who needs some research done. Now you're working for some kind of a local government research organization, if it is a particular division or department in the local government that's tasked with doing some research. Another CAP-exempt organization are nonprofit research organizations, which many of you in the room have. Most of you are working in some kind of research. If I were you, I'd start thinking about doing a volunteer project with a nonprofit research organization and see where that leads. It might lead to a job offer from a CAP-exempt organization. And lastly, what's really new and exciting to me in the new regulations that Sandra told you were passed last December but implemented this past January, the fourth CAP-exempt organization are nonprofit organizations affiliated with a university. So, what's new is that the new regulations clarify what it means to be affiliated with a university. And through the grace of God, the USCIS has totally broadened what it means to be affiliated. It used to mean that the university and the nonprofit had to be controlled by the same entity, which was such a narrow definition it was almost impossible to meet. Now it only requires that the nonprofit have a written agreement with the university and that the benefit of that written agreement actually benefits the university in their educational mission. It opens up a whole host of opportunities for people who can't win the lottery.
So how would someone in this room go about getting into one of these programs? Because
Right.
as an attorney, we can only really be the advocate
Actually,
of either.
you'd have to pitch someone like Sandra.
Of course,
Sandra, how
I
do
do
you-
that every day.
Sandra, how do you feel about being a CAP-exempt organization with all of these entrepreneurs running to us looking for visas and affiliations and all that kind of stuff?
So I'm going to say I absolutely agree with Jeff on this. There's a lot of opportunity. The final rule that went into effect in January is expansive. It really covered a lot of territory, and the benefit of the fact that we have a final rule in the regulations is that we are no longer at the whim of USCIS memo guidance, which could have been superseded at any moment. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be sort of researched, and all of this is a discussion for anyone that's interested in really sort of delving into this. You should have that with an attorney. I do want to preface this by also just kind of making that normal disclaimer that nothing that we're saying right now constitutes legal advice. We're here to inform you, help you understand what options can be available to you. I will say that now that I am, the regulations do kind of broaden this CAP exemption benefit. And as an institute of higher education, I am aware that now it's almost like we've got a target on our backs, right? People want to come to us for that benefit because the H-1B cap is so difficult to try to navigate. I will say this, if you do have a relationship with a university that meets these qualifications, work with your institutional partner. Help them guide you. All of the universities have internal protocols regarding how to navigate these issues. They have policies regarding H-1B sponsorship. So I would say make sure that you're talking to the right people within that institutional setting.
Sandra, I want to put you on the spot. I'm going to give you a quick scenario I think you can all relate to. I met a nice guy in the audience before. He's in the back of the room shaking someone's hand. He doesn't even know I'm talking about him. Hey, Singh, I'm talking about you. So I'm going to use Singh for an example. His employer would not file an H-1B for him. He missed out on the lottery. His OPT is expiring, and he wants to know what to do. I have an idea that I tell my clients. Sandra, what would happen if Singh contacted you as counsel for University of Massachusetts and said, could I please have a list of all nonprofits that have an affiliation agreement with your university? Because that might lead to 10, 15, 20 companies that are CAP exempt that you wouldn't know about otherwise. Or rather than contact you, where could anyone in this audience find out? Who are the nonprofits that University of Massachusetts has an affiliation agreement with to do anything? Is there a way to find that out?
So I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even have that information. And at the end of the day, I'm here to represent my institution. So, that's not even producible information from my office.
But if you folks out there could find out who are nonprofits that have an affiliation agreement with the university, it does open up the door to another possible cap-exempt visa. I want to just talk about the GEIR.
15 seconds.
GEIR, the Global Entrepreneur in Residence Pro. Oh, she's saying 5 minutes. Oh, but
But we're supposed to have question and answer.
Excuse me.
Right?
I don't get the whole 5.
Excuse me.
Well,
She's
that
not
might
in
be
charge.
5 minutes for me to talk about the process, because
go
you
ahead.
really do want to give yourself at least a year to think about your next step, depending on really what type of visa you're on. So if anyone's on a J visa that may be subject to 212E, and you're thinking of another visa type, you will actually, in the example of going from a J to an H1, would need to obtain a waiver before you could do that. So really, I always tell people, be very conservative when you're going through any type of immigration process, because you don't want to wait for the last minute where you have 2 months left on your J, your institute ran out of funding. We actually have about 3 clients where their labs closed down. They had no prior notice, and they're scrambling. So in that unfortunate situation, 2 of the clients actually had to go home. One client had already started working with me, and we were able to file his I-140 and green card concurrently, and he was able to get work authorization and a travel authorization. However, you do need to give yourself time, because work authorization and travel authorization does take about 4 months after filing your case. You have to go through your biometrics. There's a process.
I'm going to go, because you're going to give a commercial about my program, I'm going to let you do that. And then I think we need to take a few minutes of questions. I think people have some really interesting things to say. So please, Jeff.
The GEIR is a program that basically takes the option for universities to help private companies sponsor H-1Bs. And it makes it into a situation where it's easier for companies to find the university and to work with the university. But you don't have to work with an official GEIR university. But for example, the Venture Development Center at UMass Boston is one of the leading GEIR universities that assist startup companies that are venture-backed, who are really making a difference and need a founder, or I hope also a key player, to get a cap-exempt H-1B. And UMass Boston, through Bill's office, will talk to the company and find out, is it possible that UMass could file a cap-exempt petition, H-1B petition, to employ the foreign national part-time, maybe 5 to 7 to 10 hours a week. If the UMass can do that, and they do that, as soon as that's approved, the private company can piggyback on the cap-exempt H-1B that UMass has approved and file their own cap-exempt directly with the U.S. Immigration Service to permit the same foreign national to concurrently, at the same time, work for full-time for the private enterprise. There's a second way that universities and cap-exempt organizations can help, and Bill and the UMass VDC is doing an excellent job of the second way as well. It's if the private enterprise is located at the cap-exempt organization, as Sandra had mentioned before. And Bill's VDC is very busy hosting startup companies that have been venture-backed. They're either letting the entire company locate at the VDC, or maybe just the foreign national who needs a space, a workspace. What's very clear in the new regulations that came out in January is that if you're going to get a cap-exempt H-1B by being located at the university, You must be prepared to be physically at the university location for the majority of the time. So if you're working 40 hours, you've got to be there at least 20 hours and 1 minute. You also have to be sure that your job duties are consistent with and in furtherance of the mission of the university. I happened to look at UMass's mission statement this morning. It's very broad. Their mission statement is to basically help improve the world. I mean, I'm shortening it, but it is something like that.
It's a little bit more specific.
It's a little bit more than that. But we have been able to consistently take job duties that your companies need the H-1B employee to be doing and make them consistent with the mission of UMass. So the GEIR is a great thing. Please, it is your first thing you're going to do if you don't win the CAP exempt, if you don't win the H-1B lottery, and you do it consistent with looking at the L, the O, the E, and any other possibilities.
So, Bill, would you like to speak just a little bit to how much support and administrative effort is needed by a university to support a GEIR? Because we have a very successful program at the university, but I also want to highlight the fact that it's because Bill does a tremendous amount of work, not only in his department, but to coordinate with HR, to coordinate with other campus partners to make it a successful program.
You've said it so well, Sandra. Thank you very much. I would like to say, though, before we turn to the audience, that although we are quite progressive in what we do with the Global Entrepreneur Residence Program, it's because it makes abundant sense for the university to do that, number one. And number two, we only accept 28% of those people who apply. So it's a privilege to be associated with the University of Massachusetts, and it's very difficult to make your case, but I would encourage you to try to do so, because we will always listen. Does the audience have one or two questions? Please. And scream.
Scream. Okay. So I work for Greentown Labs. It's the largest clean tech incubator in Somerville. We are currently constructing a global center for clean tech innovation that has room for more than 100 startups. And I receive applications from entrepreneurs from all over the world, hoping to access the US market. The biggest questions that I get asked are immigration and kind of how do they incorporate, what's their path. And what I've kind of found, which is a little frustrating, is there's not a lot of kind of information on local and state governmental, or there's not an entity that's taking responsibility for kind of providing a concierge type service or information. It's even kind of complicated to figure out on MassGov's website what the options are for entrepreneurs for immigration. Who should I be connecting these guys to? Lawyers, investors? Like who is the right path for me to be making these introductions?
Well, I would suggest Mass Tech Collaborative is a starting place, but I would love to chat with you after because people, I mean, you put the people in this room together, we could come up with the right system for the Commonwealth to be a leader in providing this information.
I'm down for that. So I'd like to introduce Mary Rose Greeno, who actually acknowledged the Mass Tech Collaborative earlier on as the sponsor of the program, but Mary Rose would, I'm sure, love to join us in trying to make an attempt, at least to point people in the right direction. You had a question, please. Please come up. This won't go that far.
Can you talk a little bit about what constitutes a research organization?
The regulations give a definition of what is a research organization, and it's completely unhelpful. It says any organization whose main mission is either basic or applied scientific research. That's all the regulation says. There's ways to be creative in that, but I think many people could justify that the research they're doing is basic or applied scientific research, but that's what the regulation says.
We are going to have to move along, otherwise we'll be here overnight. So I want to thank the three of you.
Thank you for
amazing.
having us.
Thank you, Sandra, for prepping, Jeff for creating this program, and Rachel for always having amazing energy and look.